It's to all metal maniacs and welcome for yet another video on the Iron Horde channel and another video from the Essential Albums series. For those who have been following these videos, you might recall I had already mentioned I wanted to do this list today as it captures a style that is very close to my heart, and as you have already read from the video title, I'm referring to the Italian doom metal scene. In this video, for the first time, I'm not going to choose albums only from the 80s and decided to widen the timeline, as the sound created from these bands is quite unique, limited to a relatively small group of bands, and it is not really attached to the period of its release, but more of a state of mind of the artists. And I have always loved how the younger bands have carried onwards the torch of such a dark and mystical sound. So light up a couple of candles, prepare some red wine, and let's go on this journey to the mystical world of Italian doom metal. Let's go. Thanks for joining us again for this video. If you are new here, the aim of this channel is to review albums, festivals, suggest bands, delve in the cultural aspect of heavy metal in general and more. So if you're interested in this content, please consider supporting this channel by subscribing, liking and sharing our videos on social media. Well then, some of you might be asking yourselves why did he choose the Italian scene in particular for this video. What does it have that makes it so special? As most of you know by now from previous videos I did, my go-to subgenre of heavy metal has always been doom metal. I actually think I was into doom metal before I was into traditional metal. That is how important and essential it was for my development in the whole genre of heavy metal. As with a lot of styles of music and art in general, they are a reflection of one's culture, one's upbringing, the environment you're born into, and much more aspects. My upbringing is heavily into a Catholic country, a country that, notwithstanding its small size, has a different church for every day of the year. Having been surrounded by the notions of heaven and hell, crosses, death, rituals, processions, I was always quite an observant child, and these imageries, the smell of incense in the churches, the whole kind of esoteric world remained ingrained in my head and became kind of a part of who I am. But then I remember discovering a band named Yakula, a band that kind of opened a whole new world to me, which I became totally fascinated with. It is mainly a progressive rock band founded in 1968 by Antonio Bartocchetti, along with the help of a medium named Franz Portensi. They released an obscure and heavy music, and it was really sinister, sometimes quite repetitive, kind of haunting, and mostly it was instrumental. That repetition that kind of takes your mind into a loop of mysticism. Now, as usual, Yakula weren't born in a vacuum. At the time, Italy had a very successful progressive rock scene, and Yakula was kind of the odd child of this scene. Add to this the popularity of horror movies by legendary Italian directors Bava and Fulci, which again are obvious influences on Yakula's music, and you get more or less an idea here of the greatness of this music. Now, Maltese and Italian culture are very similar, so I could easily identify with this art and the ways of viewing particular aspects of what was going on around us. Just the little things, as a church bell ringing every evening at a specific time, or the sound of the organ played in a certain way, reminds me of when I used to go to church with my parents and wait for the Mass to begin whilst raising my eyes and seeing the bloody face of Christ nailed to the cross. So anyway, this led me to search for more and more music like this, and quite possibly with heavier riffs than Yakula had. And this is where the Italian doom arrives and fills in that void. Heavy bands with that feel of symmetry. I tell you, there's no other scene that captures these emotions as vividly as the Italian doom scene, and that is why it is so special. It is unique and delivers something which rarely can be found with such consistency in any other bands from other countries. So here I am now listing the 10 records which I think they encapsulate these sounds and have kept me company for all these years, especially during the late night hours and very early mornings, when everything is calm and quiet and I can delve mind and spirit into the sounds coming out of this music. So I will not be repeating myself over and again with each album, but rather will speak about some of the peculiar aspects of each record. The bands have been listed here in chronological order from the latest to the earliest. And the first record over here is the record The Third Ion by Blackout, released in 2011 with I Hate Records. Blackout are one of those bands that have really kept true to the essence of Italian doom metal. Organs, heavy riffs, lyrics about death, esotericism, superstitions, witchcraft. The main ingredients are here, all present, along with some of the greatest music as well. An interesting thing about this record is there is a kind of a continuation from one track to the other, and I really like that. It is the same feeling as when reading a book from one chapter to the other. There's that kind of continuation from one end to the start of the new chapter. Also, another thing that comes to mind is that these bands, although following a somewhat saturated occult rock metal sound of the time, that don't sound as a fake or an imitation, just like many other bands from around the world who follow this trend that started around the mid-2000s. They are authentic. When something is really part of you and you're putting it in a music format, you can hear that it is authentic. Yes, this album is one of those records from the more recent years that fits this profile perfectly. Favorite track is the last track on this record, titled The Black Oath. Next is the self-released debut album by Tony Tears, titled Voci del Passato, released in 2009. When listening to this for the first time, one would think this record was released in the 80s or early 90s. The fuzzy production is reminiscent of St. Vitus, and the whole aura reminding us of some of the greatest of the scene, which I will not reveal the names for now because they included later on in this video. The use of the Italian language really adds to the entire experience as well on here, as with other albums who use the Italian language as well. I'm a big advocate for bands to use their mother tongue in their music. Tony Tears, which is practically a one-man band, was founded in 1988. For a number of years they have released a long series of demos and a couple of EPs before arriving to this debut. But although a number of years have passed, they still kept true to that Italian doom sound. There are many parts throughout the album when the lyrics are spoken rather than sung. Imagine a 70s horror movie soundtrack accompanied by some electric guitar and the odd heavy riff throughout. This is the feel I get when listening to records like this one over here. It is almost a soothing experience to a certain extent. Favorite track is Terza Profezia. Continuing with our list, and now we have the debut self-titled album by Abysmal Grief, released in 2007 with the legendary Italian label Black Widow Records. Well, the band name and not least the album cover really depicts the music here. In parts it feels as if it is a funeral procession, and in other parts as if it is the soundtrack to a seance. The use of keys and violin sounds really create such a gloomy and somber atmosphere. Again, not overdoing it, but keeping a good balance between all of this and the heavy doomy parts. So that is the ability of this record. And here there is also a gothic feel at times, mainly because of the vocal timbre. Reminds me of the vocalist from another band named Division Bleak, a kind of very low-tuned kind of voice. I think fans of Doom Gothic style would need to really check this band as soon as possible. I'm actually not a big fan of the mixture of both styles in general, but I have always appreciated this band maybe because in their music there is still that Italian doom metal touch, basically. My favorite track here would be Cultus Lugubris. So onwards to one of my favorite bands from the scene, and I'm speaking about none other than L'Impero delle Ombre and their debut self-titled album released in 2004, again with Black Widow Records. I remember discovering L'Impero delle Ombre around the time this first album was released, and immediately from the first notes of the first track, ironically titled Canto del Cigno, or Swan Song in English, unlike the title, they surely weren't on the verge of retiring here. From the very first few notes I knew that I will love this band as it has my same sensitivity to this type of music. And each and every track on here for me was like filling a gap in my musical soul. The lyrics, again in Italian, very poignant and well dealing with suffering, loneliness, solitude, occultism and similar subjects. The band's backbone are the Cardellino brothers, Giovanni on vocals and Andrea on guitars, and have to say this record has some tasty guitar solos. Perfect use of the keyboards as well to create that mystical aura. Everything is so placed perfectly. This album feels like a journey to a far, foggy, desolate land, and quite possibly the Empire of Shadow, as the band name translated in English suggests. For the favorite track here I would go for the one named Tormento ed Estasi. Fifth album on this list, and after much debate with myself, imagine that, huh? I decided to include this album. The record is by a band called All Souls Day, and the album is titled Into the Morning, released in 2001 with Doom Symphony Records. And why all the self-inflicting debate, you might ask? That's because this album doesn't strictly hold that Italian doom metal sound. They have a lot of Candlemas influence in their music, much more epic in general, so I was hesitant, but I have to say that there are parts which take me back to that Italian sound. I had also shortlisted the band Thunderstorm, but then decided not to add them as their sound is even more towards the epic metal sound. But nonetheless, go check them out as well. They are one of my favorite bands as well. Anyways, this record is filled with heavy riffs which drive the music forward, but there is also a subtle use of keyboards which creates that ghastly feel, that odd sound of the bell and that dark haunting beauty, if I may describe it in this way, which is kind of depicted in the cover art, really makes this album such a pleasure to listen to. Vocals are very operatic, very high in their delivery and done very well. They also add to that melancholic vibe, so to speak. So a great record, and unfortunately a very obscure one as well. So fans of doom metal, especially those into the epic style, check this record out as soon as possible. My favorite track on this album would be Immortal Day. Now the second part of the list, and going towards the classic albums from this era, including some of the big names of the genre. Next in line is the band The Black, and I have decided to include the album Apocalypsis, released in 1996 with Black Widow Records. Now this band And the main man behind the band, Mario Di Donato, somewhat of a cult legend, a multifaceted artist, mainly as a musician and a painter. In fact, every cover art of his records is painted by him. Di Donato is actually one of the originators of the Italian doom scene. I think in the 90s they were the only band to carry on with this kind of style before the revival of the early 2000s. An interesting aspect of the band is that the lyrics in most of their albums are generally in Latin, but on this record the titles are mainly in Italian, and even the lyrics are kind of a mix of both. On this record the focus is on the book of Revelation and the fight between good and evil subjects, which fit perfectly with the style of the music. If there is a band who reminds me of Yakula, I mentioned, this is the one. Even the guitar playing of Di Donato is very reminiscent of that by Bartocchetti. There's that certain dark prog element that permeates the music in this record and in their whole discography. A band that, for all the great material they have released and for always being true to their art, really deserve more recognition, and I'm honored to say we have hosted the band in the 2012 edition of the Malta Doom Metal Fest. A magical performance that I will never forget, and some of the best moments from those couple of days have actually been included in the Di Donato's biography, which I have to admit it is one of those proud moments from the work and the organization of such a festival year after year. So get this. Anyways, I think this record is amongst my favorite from the band, and my favorite track from here would be Guerra in Cielo. Now another band with Mario Di Donato, but this time only on guitars, and I'm referring to the album Via Crucis by the band Requiem, released in 1990 by Minotauro Records. Lyrics are in English this time round, and add to the whole mix the different style of vocals. It really gives the record a different experience than the records from the Black. Actually, vocals have a rougher edge here, and the music seems to be more riff based, and some great and catchy riffs indeed on this record. Mind you, there is that Italian doom sound of mysticism and obscurity, but at times this record kind of veers towards touches of US power metal. This creates a very interesting contrast in this record, which is very unique. Needs to be listened actually to be understood well, and if I had to choose a favorite track from here, it would be the track Heart of Storm. So we have arrived, if I'm not mistaken, to the 8th album on this list, and to an artist that possibly embodies the Italian dark doom metal sound. I'm referring to none other than the cult figure of Paul Chain. Now, Paul Chain has an extensive discography, be it from the time he was with DataSess to his numerous solo projects, so it was kind of difficult to narrow it down to one record. But I have decided to go for his 1989 release, Life and Death, released with Minotauro Records, a label with whom he served as an artistic director for some time. This is the debut under this name, as the previous releases were released under the band name Paul Chain and the Violet Theatre. I feel this record is really the perfect symbiosis between the heavy riffs of doom metal with that Italian twist. It has an extensive dark ambient feel as well. Paul Chain, like many artists, tended to exhibit quite an eccentric character throughout the years, and I have heard first-hand accounts of people who had closely worked with Paul Chain stating that he would act erratically at times, yet his artistic prowess was evident to everyone, and I think on this record he brings among his best efforts. Maybe this kind of behavior is a factor which ended up creating this kind of mystical persona around him. As far as I know, he nowadays lives in a closed community and has practically left behind the style of music. As on many occasions, he didn't have a fixed lineup for his record, but rather had various musicians playing on some tracks and others on other tracks. Although track titles are in English, most of the lyrics are just phonetic sounds without particular meaning. This was kind of the Paul Chain language, if I could call it so. So Paul Chain is the name, and you better keep it in your mind if you are or want to delve deeper in this style of music. Favorite track on this record would be Kill Me, but the opening track, Steel Breath, being a total synth track with its dark heavy atmosphere like a horror movie soundtrack penned by Fritzy or Goblin, is a highlight for me as well. Next in line is one of the most famous Italian heavy metal bands ever, and I'm referring to Death SS and their album In Death of Steve Sylvester, released in 1988 with Metal Master Records. Again, I wasn't sure in the beginning if I was going to include this album in this list, because what we have here is not exclusively a doom metal album. This album is more or less a compendium of metal styles from the melting pot of the 80s. It combines a slightly blackened feel, especially in the vocals, with heavy metal that alternates between doom, think Witchfinder general style, and speed metal at times. The style is almost too eccentric for its own good. It fuses all these elements and creates quite a unique sound. It should also be remembered that this debut is from a band that had been around for over 10 years prior to this, and so it has a certain authenticity to it. In fact, Paul Chain was part of this band before this record, when Death SS veered more towards the doom metal sound. Obviously, Paul Chain wanted to keep playing that style, and Steve Sylvester, I think, wanted to experiment more, and quite possibly this was the reason for the departure of the former from the band. So although this record brings a mix of style, yet it still holds that mystical, dark vibe synonymous with most of these bands, and apart from that, they were for sure a big influence on all the bands in this list, so it would have been a disservice kind of to leave them out. Favorite track on here would be most probably Black Mummy. I think yes, Black Mummy would be my favorite track on this record. Last album on this list, and most probably the one that epitomizes the Italian doom sound, and one of the first to capture it on a full-length record. I'm referring to the album Land of Mystery by Black Hole, released in 1985 with City Records. An album which perfectly fuses the prog rock influence I mentioned in the beginning, the heavier riffs, in such a symbiotic way that it actually feels as the flaws become its highlights. Some tracks have those repetitive riffs that might seem too much, but they create that sense of perdition almost. The vocals, the way they are mixed, sound as if they're coming from a different room or a total different area from where the music is coming from. Kind of the melancholic tone of someone who is trapped and wants to escape, but somewhat lost faith in doing so. The use of the organs give it that eerie, dark feel, kind of a doom metal version of the band Goblin. Those odd sounds of chains, bells, and everything truly creates a kind of a journey into an unknown, dark, and mysterious world. These are the feelings that are synonymous with the Italian doom metal scene, and this one, being one of the first of its kind, deserves a very particular mention. Mind you, this is not music for everyone. There are a number of flaws here, production-wise, and the vocals. To a professional, I guess they might seem very amateurish, but as I have said in other videos as well, metal is not about perfection, but about emotions, and this record really has plenty of those. If I had to choose a favorite track, that would be Spectral World. Before closing, I would like to make a reading suggestion as well. This is the first time I'm doing it. First, before I showed you the autobiography by Mario De Donato, and I advise you to get this because it's a very good insight in the mind of a cult figure in the Italian doom metal scene, and you will be able to understand more the music, where it is coming from, basically. So I really suggest you get this book in your collection. Another book I would like to suggest, although it isn't strictly about doom metal, but it's written by an Italian guy who is really into, obviously, the doom metal coming from his country, and it is this one, Children of Doom, by Edoardo Vitolo. It's this one over here, and it's a quite substantial book, plenty of information over here, and it covers more or less the years of doom metal from Black Sabbath to the present day, basically. But it's very well written, and I suggest you get that as well if this is a style you feel is close to your heart. So I have come to the end of another video. Hope you liked my suggestion, and I hope I didn't get carried away too much with all the darkness, mysticism, occult definitions, and these records really have such an authentic feel of these sensations that one cannot overstate the importance of those emotions in this music over here. Anyways, please go ahead and let us know in the comments if you agreed with these choices, which bands and albums you would have added, which I didn't include. I would be happy to discover more bands in this style, quite possibly even outside of Italy, although I find that to be a bit difficult because obviously the country is a big influence. So I hope you have already subscribed, click on the bell, share this video, and anyway, supported us in a way or another. If you haven't done so yet, what the hell you are still waiting for? And anyway, check out the affiliate links in the description. You get a small commission, as you know, to no extra expense for you, the buyer. Nothing more from my side. Anyway, stay safe and metal on. Cheers.